Right. So my talk is obviously about Peter Dulvey Stonham, 1877 to 1942. I consider him to be a supreme Eastbourne architect. I'm not suggesting he is the supreme architect, but he must be up there. My talk concerns the architect who lived and worked in Eastbourne from the late 19th century through the Edwardian and interwar periods until World War II. Peter Dulvey Stonham and his architectural practice had a significant impact on the development of Eastbourne, and many of the buildings he designed are still with us today. Over 1,000 applications for building approvals were made to the Eastbourne Borough Council by Stonham from 1905 to 1942, with the majority being constructed. This represents between 10 and 20% of all applications received by the council each year. This equates to about 350 houses designed, with about 215 being what I would consider to be large houses. On the screen, Stonham is pictured in his Royal Flying Corps uniform in 1917. This is the earliest photograph I've got of him. He reached the rank of lieutenant. He was restricted to ground duties because he was obviously in his 30s by that time, and probably helped with the construction of buildings for airfields, but I can't find any more about that aspect of his existence. The house in the drawing is of 11 The Goffs, which is a listed building which was approved by the council in 1909 and built in 1910. A sort of arts and crafts influenced design, taking references from the Old English vernacular architecture, and it was featured in an architectural journal, the Building News, in 1911. So they had a whole page on just this property alone. I have researched Mr. Stonham for the past 20 years and hope to publish a book soon. The photograph is of Grasmere, which is 17A17 Pashley Road, one of the finer compositions from 1925. It was designed for Arthur Edward Rush, who was then, shortly after this period, to be a mayor of Eastbourne from 1938 to 43. And he owned Vinyl's retail store in Terminus Road, which specialised in drapery and home furnishes, I understand. Stonham also drew up designs to alter the Vinyl store. You'll find a lot of this with his existence, that he would design properties for people and then design work connected with their business if they had retail premises or factories, and he would often also do it the other way around. He would alter some of their commercial buildings and then be engaged later. I'd like to tell you about the man, his life and his work. So Peter Stonham was born in East Hill in Ashford, Kent, on the 18th of May 1877, and his father was also called Peter Dulvey Stonham, and his mother was called Caroline Margaret. Peter had two brothers, an elder brother George Gavin, a younger brother Arthur Douglas, and a sister, an older sister, Mabel Margaret. His father was a miller. The family moved around Kent and Sussex as a result of his father's occupation. Stonham's father is recorded as a miller's assistant in 1871, whilst at Maidstone, and then as a miller manager in 1877. at Ashford. In 1878, the family were living at Fairlight Mill, Guestling. That's the mill there. The family were fairly well off with 2 female servants and employing 3 men and a boy at the mill. In 1891, they were to be found in the High Street at West Malin in Kent. But it's interesting, and this might reflect the wealth of the family. 3 of the youngest children were actually away from home at private boarding schools. At this time, our architect, his father was a travelling miller. Peter, who was 14 at this time, and his younger brother Arthur were at the same school, Fir Lodge Prep School in Sydenham, London. And this was described as a school for the sons of gentlemen. Now, whether that was overly inflated, I don't know, but you will certainly know one of the other attendees. That was Sir Ernest Shackleton, the explorer. He attended. He was born a few years earlier than Stonham, but they may possibly have been at the school at the same time, but he was there. And then, interestingly, they may have crossed paths again, because Shackleton's family, they moved to Eastbourne in 1916 until 1921. The big picture is the architect's father, Peter Stonham Senior, and his mother, Caroline Margaret, and there's a property there shown in Brighton, Freshfields Road. So although the Stonham family had been reasonably well off, the economics of the corn milling industry started to change quite radically at the end of the 19th century, and it became industrialised. This resulted in the decline of independent millers using windmills. So it was very much factory orientated. The family moved to Brighton in the 1890s, living at the property there, Freshfields Road, from 1894 to 99. It's a terraced house that still exists. Mr. Stonham Senior, however, became an employee at a street guide publisher, Pike & Co. It's like, for some of you who might remember, the street guides like Kelly's Directories. So they were a company that did that sort of thing. Unfortunately, there was a big tragedy which hit the family in March of 1897 when, aged 49, Mr. Stonham Senior committed suicide by drowning. His body was found on the beach at Brunswick Square. It was unfortunately widely publicised in the papers throughout the whole country. A lot of little newspapers loved a little snippet on something, and because this was such a tragic circumstance, they reported it. He was under notice to leave from Pike & Co. because he had collected some money and failed to pay it in. An inquest was held, and he had left a note explaining the circumstances. And you could imagine, particularly in those times, but to be honest, at any time, it was made a significant impact on his wife and his children. And in my view, the trauma probably continued to motivate his son, our architect, to make a financial success of his life and avoid the sad end of his father. So what happens next is, less than a year on, Stonham moves to Eastbourne at the age of 21, and is employed as an architectural assistant for the chap in the photograph, Frederick George Cook. who ran an established and well-respected architectural and engineering practice in Eastbourne. By the early 1900s, the rest of the family, his brothers, sisters and his mother, all moved to Eastbourne for a new life in the rapidly expanding town. Stonham marries. With a secure job and good prospects, Stonham marries in 1901 to Frances Ellen Davis, known as Nellie, at Rye Church. She was from that part of the world. Rye Foreign, I think, the actual parish she was actually from. They have 3 children, another Peter Dulvey Stonham, and then 2 daughters, Beryl Irene and Joan Ellen. Just to explain, the Dulvey Stonham name, the Dulveys, in respect of Sarah Dulvey and John Stonham, married in 1774 in Uddymore in East Sussex, and from that point on you can usually find at least one Peter Dulvey Stonham, so they try to retain this name through the generations. Stonham does very well at the Mr. Cook's practice and becomes the chief architectural assistant, and is mentioned in the local press from time to time. He also becomes a Fellow of the Society of Architects from 1903, and he's directly associated with various schemes, such as the following. I'll just run through them. The reason for putting on, we see on the previous slide and this side, you'll see signatures of Frederick Cook, but you may see some initials, and that's Peter Stonham's own handwriting. He's written all that out, and he's written out the applications in many cases. So he's the one that's really driving a lot of the architectural input from Cook's practice. Now, the first example is the creation of the Chatsworth Hotel. This was originally a block of 3 houses, and it was skillfully converted in 1905 for the hotel, which still exists today. And this is for a John William Brigstock, who was a stockbroker, and he was the director of the actual hotel company. And we'll come across him again shortly, because a large house is designed for him by, you guess it, Stonham. The next one is a competition was won when the council wanted to build an elementary school, a new one in East Street. I don't think much of this, if any, of the building remains, but anyway, this is another one for 1905. And so they won a competition to go ahead with this. And the last of the examples, again, people who are interested in George Orwell might know this school, St Cyprian's School at Summerdown Road. This was a building, again, designed by Stonham within the Cook practice. Eric Blair, as then, who became George Orwell, was a boarder from 1911 to 1916, and he hated the time he was there, apparently. Through looking at all the plans I've seen, I've got some awareness, at least, of a drawing style, and all of these plans appear to be in that same style, so I've had to assume it's probably Stonham's own hand, but he doesn't sign any of the actual plans themselves. Having worked for Mr. Cook for about 7 years, Stonham, at the age of 28, decides to take a chance and set up his own architectural practice. This is at 130 Terminus Road, so this is a sort of contemporary photograph of that section of Terminus Road. What is now, because they renumbered Terminus Road later, what became number 62 was bombed in World War II, so it doesn't exist. But work comes in at an ever-increasing rate, and the practice rapidly expands, and it becomes very well established, one of the leading architectural firms in Eastbourne. Ultimately, the architectural practice could put their skills to designing almost anything, from a cabman's shelter, cinemas, shops, hotels, churches, entertainment venues, business premises of all sorts. But Stonham became most particularly known for the large houses. The practice also did design more modest houses. Just to amplify how much business potentially would be available, Eastbourne expanded at such a fast rate during the back end of the 19th century and through to the early part of the 20th century, that there were great opportunities in such a growing town. Stonham was in the right place at the right time, taking full advantage of the opportunities for a hard-working, skilled designer with an entrepreneurial eye. The population of the town, as you see on the charts, accelerates from a mere 4,000 in the 1850s until we get to this sort of time when 1911 we're a population of something in the order of 53,000, so it's a huge increase. And it continues to grow at a slightly more modest rate into the 1930s. So an expanding town with huge opportunity and potential. In the early years of the practice, they were getting in the order of 20 to 30 projects each year. The work was very varied, a range of commercial and residential developments, such as things like laundries. They were the big thing at the time on the commercial side. Everybody obviously didn't wash their own, they would send it to a laundry. And the first image I'm showing you is of St Agnes's Church, Catholic Church, Whitley Road, 1906-07, done on a very tight budget, built within a year, and this was for Reverend Father Paul Lynch, and this was constructed, the builder was James Bodle, who he worked a lot with, and it was paid for by somebody called Agnes Zimmerman, and she was a concert pianist and composer. So it's just a basic brick building with stone dressings and lancet windows in a sort of early English Gothic style. The practice was growing at such a rate that by 1910 he was changing premises and going to Arcade Chambers on 58 Grove Road. But there were other satellite offices which were set up before World War I at Rye and Bexhill-on-Sea. By way of example, there were at least 40 developments designed in Bexhill by Stonham alone. And in 1914, he was elected a Fellow of the Institute of Sanitary Engineers. This is an example of one of his earliest houses, the Holt, 1 Ashburnham Road, from 1906, which is a large house for the builder-developer John White. It has a sort of arts and craft influenced design with rendered walls, some buttressing to the walls, which you can see there. and there. Right. Tile hanging and decorative nap flint detailing. None of this detailing, you see the detailing, these are the enlarged detailed areas. You can see it on the photograph of the building there. This was for a small building for a study for J J Hissey. He was a popular travel writer who lived in Trevin Towers, which wasn't designed by Stonham because that was a little bit earlier, but this was an addition in a sort of Tudor vernacular style. But the interesting thing is that Mr. Hissey, in one of his travel books, waxes lyrical about his favourite room, his study, which has more recently been called the Tudor room, and it has an ingle-nut fireplace with a back wall covered with brick tiles in a herringbone pattern. Quite surprisingly and also miraculously, it survives. The room is relatively unchanged from that period, which was about 1910. And the photographs you will see is from 1910 from Mr. Hissey's book. And the sketch, I'm not sure who did it, but Mr. Hissey was an artist, so possibly he did that illustration. This is a charming little building that most people will have seen, the cabman's shelter in the Avenue in 1906. This was done for somebody called George Monckton. Basically, at the time, they were concerned about cabmen standing in the rain, effectively, or in bad weather. So public donations were given, and the council approved 2 of these structures, one to be fixed on the avenue, and there was one that was actually on wheels that used to apparently be moved along the front. Moving to some more houses, some semi-detached houses in Mead Street from 1907. 2 pairs were done for James Bodle, this builder developer I mentioned earlier, in a sort of Queen Anne revival influenced design. A lot of white timber work, plain tile, small paned windows on the top half of the sashes, and tile hanging. And then the terraced houses, there's quite a long row on one side of Green Street from 1908 for Albert Avard, a developer. And I think that they're going strong today, and somewhat lifted by the projecting canted bays, ground floor bays, with their little sloping roofs. Quite charming little properties. In terms of large houses, Stonham gained a reputation, as I said earlier, for this old English vernacular style, heavily influenced by the arts and crafts movement. The domestic revival took place in the later part of the 19th century, and this was really extending on from that particular period. These are houses which take some of their references from the 15th to 17th century English, Tudor, Stuart period. Things like half timbering and tile hanging and rough cast, pebble dash, etc. And use of local materials was very much emphasised. In the case of Eastbourne, the local stone is green sand, which is not the easiest material to use, and beach and field flints are used either as holes or snapped, so you get a glossy finish. So between 1906 and 1916, roughly 40 large houses were designed in the following areas: Prideaux Road, Ashburnham Gardens and Ashburnham Road, the Goffs, Ditton's Road, Southfields Road, Darley Road and Baslow Road in Meads. And that's one of his designs you'll see for Ashburnham Gardens, where you can see some of that apes some of the, that's a design from a sketch from T York's book on arts and crafts buildings. So you can see some similarities in the elements. These are just a few of the highlights of some of the earlier large houses. There isn't enough time to go through every single one of them, but I've just picked some out. This was originally called Wayside, and it's on the corner of Prideaux Road and Mill Road, and it's from 1907, and it's for Mr. Brigstock, the chairman of the Chatsworth Hotel Company. So he must have liked Stonham's work, and here we are. So it's a pebble dash rendered finish with plain tiled roofs, corner quoins using stacked plain tiles. Let me go back. If you look, those there are all stacked plain tiles. So they're just purely for a bit of relief, decoration and interest. And you've got the very tall chimney stacks with, again, some detailing along the top. And there's a rather nice bay window with leaded detail. And that's the original, one of the original plans that Stonham drew up for the property. Our next one is 38 Prideaux Road, Chameley. This was for a Miss Davis. It turns out that Miss Davis, on the applicant, was actually already Mrs. Stonham. So it was a little joke that was played occasionally by Mr. Stonham with some of the applications. This is the house he lived in with his wife and family until his wife died in 1940. So he must have loved his house. It was extended on a number of occasions. It's very, very eclectic, arts and craftsy, very sloping, low-slung roofs, rendering the oriel window, the projecting bay window, is quite a feature. Tall chimney stacks. There's some interesting detailing in tiles, and also you'll see some very big brackets there. They are holding up, supposed to be holding up the gutters, but they're not really functioning in quite that way, but they're just exaggerated brackets, which is again another feature of that arts and crafts period. And then across the road, that's 49 Prideaux Road, 1907, from Mr. Couchman. It's a cleverly detailed corner property, providing interest and detail on all prominent street elevations, with hanging plain tiles, half timbering, pebble dash rendering to the walls at the first floor, above a base of brick. Steeply pitched plain tile roofs with prominent chimneys, and in this case sliding sash windows with the top half again in small panes of glass. And the property below is Calga, 36 Prideaux Road, 1909, for A. Wales Smith. Again, it's pebble dash rendered walls which haven't been painted, so that's how they were originally. And again, you can note the very large brackets which hold up the rainwater gutters, and you can see tile work detailing in, around the enclosed open porch. There are many other Stonham houses on Prideaux Road, and what I've done is I've showed you just a few. Number 28 from 1911, number 30 from 1910, number 34 from 1911. Most have prominent projecting half-timbered first floor gabled bays, rendered pebbled ash walls, plain tile steeply pitched roofs with prominent chimney stacks and decorative tile detailing. And then on the adjacent area in Ashburnham Gardens, numbers 9, 11 and 21 were all designed in 1907. These are again the same with the sash windows with the small panes on the top half, prominent gables, and in this case with some brick dressing, stone dressing to the window surrounds and corner quoins. Yeah, there. There's the quoins there. Right. Moving on. Ditton's Road and Southfields Road, 15 and 22 Ditton's Road from 1913 and 4 Ditton's Road from 1924, and around the corner 24 Southfields Road from 1920. These are again all substantial houses, but when you look at them they're very different in detailing and the use of materials. But they've still got very much an Old English vernacular feel to them, with some influence from the arts and crafts movement, particularly the fine stone entrance way at number 22. Yeah. Move on to Stanton Prior, 71 Darley Road, 1908, for Edward Herbert Middleton Gavey, who was a surgeon major in the Royal Army Medical Corps in World War I, and sadly lost his son in Gallipoli. This is a massive house. It's an impressively detailed house with, again, pebble dash rendering walls, steep plain tile roofs, the use of plain tiles on horizontal bands to articulate the entrance columns, the use of metal covering to protect some of the projecting bays, leaded light, small plain casement windows, wrought iron detailing to the rainwater support brackets and railings. That's the original design of the house. You can see some of the tile detailing on the entrance pier and the metal sign which survives, and you can see this tile detailing at the entrance pillar. These are of the rear of the property, and you'll see some large, again, wrought iron brackets holding up the rainwater goods, and the detailing, again, a unique sort of detailing with tiles and other things on the chimney stacks. We move on to the Goffs. 13 houses were designed, 3 were not built, 3 have been demolished, but there still are 7 surviving. And I'm illustrating on this slide numbers 11, 21, 23, 29 and 31. They're all influenced by the arts and crafts movement based on, again, the English vernacular style of architecture. Number 11, as we saw earlier in that illustration, is a listed building. Again, use of plain tile, decorative detailing, a lot of geometric shapes are created. There are corner coins using tiles and decorative lead work, and quite a lot of very complicated geometrics with the fine cantilevering. If you look at number 31 in particular, if you look here, see how it steps out once, twice. So there's a lot going on there in respect of that. And if you'll probably see a repoussé type detailing in the leadwork, some designs on these properties. And you'll see the tile detailing there. And there's obviously some leaded lights as well, and very unique front doors as well. That's the other thing you'll find. On the commercial side, he was engaged by the Pier Company very early on. So he did work for the Pier Company in 1908, 9, 10, 11, in terms of various projects, but particularly the entrance kiosks here. Very unique design with their steeply pitched zinc shingled roofs, which lasted up to, I believe, World War II. He also then went on to design for the Pier Company in 1913, 14, 20, 22, 24 and 25. When he got a job, he usually got repeat work. So he was always building up more and more work. If there wasn't enough work in Eastbourne, he decided that he ought to be looking elsewhere. So this is one charming example in Aldwick near Worthing from 1913. It's now a residential care home, but this was, just somebody wanted a thatched cottage with half timbering, so he designed it, and Bainbridges of Eastbourne did the building work for it. His name obviously must have got passed around because some very large commissions started to happen. The top one, this one is all Barnum House from 1915 for Percy Gordon and Kathleen Oakeshott. These were people who made quite a lot of money in India, and although they were relatively young, they were gentlefolk, I suppose. They didn't seem to have an occupation as such, not significant. So they engaged Stonham, approached him to design this large house. Believe it or not, they demolished this Victorian house to put the Stonham house on that site, which it's mind-boggling, really, in terms of the wealth they must have had, that they could afford to indulge themselves in quite that way. It was not just the house that was designed and built, but there were also servants' accommodation in a separate wing and a gate lodge as well. And it had an estate with it. So again, a sort of English vernacular style influenced by the arts and crafts movement, with half timbering and rough cast walls. In the same village, just across the field, there is this property. This is Fir Grove from 1922 for Alfred Davidson Allen. He was a very wealthy retired Australian who made his money in Singapore most recently as a trader, and he retired to England, and he expanded an existing house hugely, and Stonham did that in the 20s. And they also provided other staff accommodation. There's a separate property for a chauffeur and one for a bailiff. So again, very much you'll see a lot of arts and crafts detailing, and then if he wasn't busy enough, he would enter competitions, and this is for a war memorial at Wakefield in Yorkshire, and it still exists today. And he won the competition, and there it is, a cenotaph structure made with Portland limestone with a York stone base. As I say, if he wasn't busy enough, he decided that he wanted to design cinemas because they were all the rage. So initially he designed a few in Eastbourne, but they didn't quite come off. So this one was to be at Langley Road and called the Colosseum in 1914. In a sort of very strident classical Baroque style, very grand looking building. That unfortunately didn't happen. I suspect something called World War I might have affected that progress. He did also design a picture hall on Star Road in Old Town, but another competitive cinema got in just a bit before, so they probably didn't want to have two in the same street. And then, but if he wasn't successful initially in Eastbourne, what happened was that Stonham and his brother Arthur decided to get involved in a cinema chain which stretched along the Sussex coast into Kent, and there was even a far reacher in Northampton. And the chain probably lasted till the early 1920s. But these, you'll see in the list, Bexhill, Lewes, St Leonard, Northampton, Worthing, Margate, Bognor Regis, another one in Bexhill which effectively replaced the earlier one, a much grander one, which still is there today. It's a T J Hughes, actually. They occupy that building. And then there's a much later one, Broadway at Haywards Heath, and I've got illustrations of some of them you'll see there. A couple of them are listed buildings as well, but some of them have met their maker. Nearer to home, you'll know this structure, and many of you have probably used the Cookson cinema. This was his 1920 cinema for Eastbourne, originally called the Picturedrome, and that was the name of the chain they had, the Picturedrome chain. With this one, if you look closely, there's lots of stone detailing, classical stone elements. You'll see pediments, niches, swags, cartouches, all to embellish the outside of the building. If you were just doing it for a budget, you wouldn't need any of that. It just shows that what sort of detailing they went to in those sorts of days. And finally, on the cinema theme, we've got just a few examples from the 1930s. This one was to have taken place on Green Street in 1935. You can see something of an Art Deco feel to the building, very much 1930s, but that didn't happen for whatever reason. It remained as a garage site. And I haven't got an illustration up there, but there was yet another property opposite the Curzon Cinema at Langley Road for another cinema there, but that I couldn't find any elevations for that building. And on the cinema front, this is the last one. It's quite a strange one in that originally Trinity Place, Stonham designed a riding school in 1929, which was featured in Architecture and Building News, a trade journal, in 1932. But by 1938, they see that's that half there. By 1938, it had been converted, the front half, the entrance for a new cinema. And this was his last cinema, called the Newsed Cinema, in 1938. Moving to shopping, if anybody shops on Mead Street, they'll know this shopping parade, which was put up in 1922. And particularly of note are the Dutch Flemish gables. You'll see there's quite a variety. And also the coloured brickwork, the different contrasting greys and the orange brickwork to make the patterns. Must have been a bit of a nightmare when you're doing bricklaying, but I'm not a bricklayer, but maybe there are ways and means, but it was obviously a challenge. And then a building that has been fairly topical in the last few years with its sad demise, the T J Hughes building, which was Dale and Curley. They engaged Stonham in the 1920s. This was a major project because it involved quite a lot of demolition and then construction of the new department store using steel girder construction. So it was quite innovative in some regards. And obviously it was during that high point of the departmental store when there was a range of high goods, fashion, etc., and you could have refreshments, afternoon tea, etc., on the upper floors in a sort of classical Baroque style with very much some ornate detailing. Please also notice the window panels here, because we'll come back to those shortly. Eastbourne Pier, the music pavilion with dance floor, 1925. You'll all know, if you've been in the town any time, certainly, unfortunately it was destroyed in 2014 in a fire, but again, this is a substantial structure. It was covered in a lot of the trade press. You can see some constructional detailing when they were putting the girders together to make the structure. It was so large that they had to increase the width of the pier, and as a consequence of that they had to get Board of Trade approval and there had to be a public inquiry into it. So it was quite a lot of effort to actually achieve this. It was also noted because of the interior had lovely decorative plaster walls with colourful floral relief patterns, and you can see just on this illustration. That's an illustration that I was given by the grandson of Peter Stonham, and that was the last remnant of Mr. Stonham's collection, because most of it went up in smoke, and I'll show you shortly why. Because the business was expanding at such a rapid rate, in 1925 they purchased this house on the corner of the avenue and Upperton Road, and it became their offices until it was bombed in World War II. It was on 3 floors, and it probably employed between 12 and 15 people. Another surveyor, Sidney Addison, occupied the same premises, who was not formally in the business, but he was often included in some of the Stonham projects. Also in 1925, it was quite an important year for Stonham himself, because he became a fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects. He was very proud of this accolade, which acknowledged his status in the architectural profession, and it is included on his gravestone. Unfortunately, that year his mother died, and his elder brother, who had suffered in World War I, had died in 1923. On the positive note, by 1928, his son, who had been educated at Eastbourne College, was incorporated into the name of the practice. So from that time on, it was Peter D. Stonham and Son. Now, these are just some shops outside Eastbourne. As the Royal Arcade Shopping Mall in Worthing, and that still exists today, again 1925. You'll notice some of the window panels, and they're designed similar time to the Dale and Curley building, the T J Hughes building, and you'll see the arcade, the glazed arcade. It's all there still today. And the other examples, you'll see there's one here for a property in Bexhill, which is for the Hudson brothers, which were a luxury chain of drapers. But Stonham also did work for properties of theirs in Eastbourne and Hove. And he also did other work for the Miller and Franklin departmental chain in Bexhill and Eastbourne. And the other illustrations are a parade of shops at Collington Avenue in Bexhill from 1913 in the sort of Tudor-Beaton style with half timbering, and then a Regency Georgian revival shop front at Hailsham. Quite a late one, 1939, but that's still there today. Moving to public houses. He designed a rather grand Victoria Drive hotel in 1927, but this wasn't built. I believe probably it was just too expensive. It's very elaborate detailing to it, a lot of stonework and intricate brickwork in a sort of Tudor-Beaton style. This appeared in the Builder publication in 1927, an illustration by Cyril Farry. The one below is actually on an adjacent site, which is now Sainsbury's. But this was originally going to be, it says as Drive Hotel, but for most of its life, I think most people would call it just a public house. Anyway, it is useful to note that he is using some detailing. You see this is on one of the gate piers, you'll see, with nap flints, green sandstones and tile work. And some of the pilasters which break up the ground floor building on the outside, they've got that sort of material treatment as well. And the ones on the right hand side, the Lockbridge Drove Arms from 1933, a Tudor-Beaton style building with half timbering, but that's no longer with us. And the Diplocks Hotel, which is now known as the Devonshire pub in a sort of neo-Georgian style. See the small pane windows up there, etc. Banks. He had at least 10 projects in Eastbourne for 3 different bank companies: Barclays, National Provincial, which eventually became NatWest, and also the London Joint City and Midland Banks, which became the Midland Bank eventually. The one on the left is Barclays on Terminus Road, which you will probably know now as the Quality Fish and Chip restaurant with flats above. The one in the middle is still the NatWest Bank. He was not the main prime designer for that. There was somebody called Frederick Charles Richard Farmer who did a lot of designs for National Provincial, but they needed to have an on-site project architect to manage the construction. So I think that was Stonham's job. And then the one on the right is in Albert Parade in Old Town, and that's from 1930 in a neo-Georgian style, which is obviously now the Trident Fish Restaurant. Hotels. Stonham his practice submitted nearly 90 applications throughout his career for various alterations to about 30 hotels, including the Cavendish, the Cumberland, the Burlington, the Lansdowne, the Old Albion, but most particularly the ones I'm illustrating here is he massively expanded the Hydro Hotel on Mount Road. There had been an established hotel there before, but Stonham's contribution was the huge frontage block, and you won't see it, but at the back of the hotel where the dining room is and the staff accommodation used to be, I believe that's probably now more bedrooms, that was all designed in 1937. So you've got a striking entrance frontage, you've got more bedrooms, public reception and entertainment rooms, and staff accommodation. So we did a huge amount there. The other hotel, which hasn't been a hotel for some time, but thankfully the building has been converted to flats, is the Sussex Hotel on Cornfield Terrace, and that was designed in 1934, this building here. You'll know it with the 2 Italian restaurants on the ground floor. I haven't put up another illustration, but you would be amused that even the Grand Hotel he did work for, and the entrance feature as you go in and the lounge on the left hand side, that is all from Mr. Stonham. So he got everywhere. He was engaged by a lot of companies on retailing, but also on the emerging motor industry. Caffins took a shine to him from quite an early time, and I've just picked out 3 examples, but he got involved in at least 10 projects in Eastbourne, and because the chain expanded, I believe he was involved in many, many more across Sussex. But unfortunately, when I've contacted the Caffin organisation, a lot of their records were destroyed in World War II. So unless I can find through record offices, drawings that have survived, then I'm not 100% certain. Anyway, for Terminus Road, I've got a building from 1919 in a classical style. You'll know it as W.H. Smith's. Sorry, I've gone on. There we are. See that? You'll see Caffins, and that's the original drawing, and that's as it is today. The other two no longer exist. Some of you might remember this one here, which is in a sort of Art Deco-y type design on Seaside from the 1920s, the garage and showroom there. And that was bulldozed, I think, in the late 1980s. And Kingsway in Hove, this is from 1937, it's very Art Deco-y, clean lines, etc. And that's now a block of flats on that particular site. Queen Alexandra Cottage Homes extensions. Again, he had a very long relationship with the Queen Alexandra Cottage Homes. He didn't design the original building because that's really before he had his own practice properly set up. But he designed huge numbers of extensions, 7 schemes from 1911 to 1937. And the ones featured in the picture are from 1924 and 1927, which still exists today. If you're looking at the building, the matron's house, which is the one in the middle, and to the left, that is all Stonham's work. His wife was also very active in fundraising initiatives in several of the local charities, and particularly this one. In 1927, All Saints Church burnt to the ground. The only significant thing left was the tower. So Stonham was jointly engaged with Arthur Richard George Fenning, who was an established church architect, and they together, within 2 years, rebuilt this Gothic style church. And they made some improvements and slight alterations. Many of you will know this one. This is over the back from where I live, so I've watched with interest. This again was jointly commissioned, Stonham and Arthur Fenning, with also consulting architects Tatchell and Wilson from London. The ensemble church, vicarage and church hall, so you've got to look at it as a whole, was so well regarded that an artist impression, and this is the artist impression, featured at the Royal Academy of Arts Summer Exhibition of 1935. It was also covered extensively in the trade press, in the Builder magazine in 1935, the Architect's Journal in 1940, and the Architect and Building News of 1940. It's not everybody's taste, obviously. It's a large building. They said that there's probably enough money to have built 3 parish churches, but instead, almost an abbey-style church was built. And from day one, unfortunately, it didn't really work. There were problems with some of the detailing, with the damp penetration into the building, and by 2002, it was no longer used as a church, and by 2020, it was demolished. But the parish hall and the vicarage still remain, although the vicarage is vacant at the moment. And in this photograph, we have Mr. Stonham in the middle, and somebody called Herbert Victor James on the left-hand side, I believe, who was the executor for Eliza Watson Trust. She left all the money for this church and also assisted with the All Saints Church as well. Back to large houses. From 1919 to 1940, a further 175 large detached houses were designed. But they were scaled back to some degree because of the decline in the use of residential domestic servants. And I think something called income tax. They had to pay for World War One, you know, so everybody was somewhat less wealthy. There are clusters again. There are particularly on Prideaux Road, as mentioned earlier, but it goes right into this interwar period. Pashley Road, Summerdown Road, King's Drive, Torfield Road, St Anne's Road, Selwyn Road, South Lynn Drive, Millgap Road, the Park Close, half of the Park Close, Bickle Grove, Upperton Road, but as I say, there were many other groups and also individual properties dotted around the town. I'm just going to go through a few of them. This is Lockwood on 2 Compton Place Road, 1923, for Captain A.L. Payne. Now this is something of an eye-catcher, but it's not what you might expect. It's not an arts and craftsy, half-timbered property. It's got more of a classical influence, but I think sometimes he wasn't fixed in his ideas. He would design and have some flexibility with his approach. So it's a rather, you know, pleasant, almost like a little, you know, it's like a wedding cakey type looking property. I think it's quite pleasant. Pashley Road, 1920s. There are lots of properties along this road, and I sort of had already featured Mr. Rush's property, but I think it is a particularly fine example, top left. But these are just a number of others within the street. There are more, but it's getting a good photograph is often a bit of a challenge. And many of the other houses are very different in design, you'll see, but they're, you know, basically picking from the vernacular Old English style, half timbering, tile hanging, plain tile, decorative detailing, leaded light, casement windows. And then round the corner in Summerdown, again there's a cluster of properties there, and I've just picked 2 out. There's Kingscote, which is number 52 from 1925, where it's got a large 2-storey gabled entrance. And you'll see some brick detailing there, some diaper work patterns, and there's a cruciform window in brick with a drip mould there. And then this is number 42, Lichgate, and it's named after this structure that still exists there. And that uses some green sand, the local stone, and some tile hanging, and then some half timbering. So quite intricate set of materials are being used. King's Drive. This was a relatively new road, and therefore it was a big opportunity for effectively ribbon development between established Eastbourne and Hampden Park. And the builder W.J. Martin must have obtained a lot of land because Stonham worked with him, and Stonham alone, I reckon he certainly designed over 25 of these half-timbered properties. Originally, the renders wouldn't have been painted. This is a pebble dash render, you'll see that's more how it originally was. But many of the houses have decided to paint the render white, which is fine, but it's more maintenance, of course. And there's a lot of interesting details in terms of doors. A lot of the windows have changed, but these are some of the originals leaded light windows. And you can see how the bay comes out. It's so it is projecting out. Park Close. The original concept was 20 houses around a grass oval, and it was designed originally by Richard Goulburn Lovell in 1928. But after 10 were completed, there seemed to be a problem in about 1929, and I believe the development company started to fail. So Stonham was brought in and he designed the remaining 10 from 1933. Again, they are drawn from the arts and crafts movement, the domestic revival of English architecture, the use of Old English, Tudor, vernacular detailing. Most of them they're of a theme, but they are different. So when you walk around, you get the impression that there's a commonality, but they're not, except in one case where there's a pair of semis there. All of the rest, there's slight differences. But these sold, so I can only think that the designs were more practical and cost effective than the original design. They're probably slightly more affordable. 4 were tailored for individual clients, and then 4 for James Bodle again, he's the developer builder, and 2 for Messrs Lovells, who were developers. It's now a conservation area. And we move on. Torfield Road, Selwyn Road and St Andrew Road. This formed the Torfield estate and was developed with large detached houses with half-timbered Tudor-Beaton designs predominating. And you'll see it's the 1930s we're talking about, the late 20s, that sort of period. So over 5-6 years you've got these, most particularly in terms of fine detailing is this property here, Linston. And that was designed as a wedding gift, I believe, for one of Stonham's daughters. Beryl Stonham married Harold Franklin, and Linston is made up of half of their surnames. So you've got the Lynn from Franklin and the Ston from Stonham. And that's still as it is today. But you'll see there's quite a lot of tile work detailing, and there's a lot of brick detailing, herringbone patterning within the half timbering, and the barge board timbers are quite ornate. But you'll see there's a lot of variation amongst the properties I'm showing here. These are not all of them, but the ones, and in some cases some of the original bathrooms exist. Quite interesting early tiling survives. And it's a conservation area, that as well. Milberdown. So this is just a short distance away, but it's very, very different in design terms. It's really leaning to the Art Deco sort of period, and that's a picture of Stonham with a cigarette in about 1930, and this was built for Mr. Franklin. And you might recall, you heard his name a little bit earlier with the departmental stores. So Stonham had done work on an existing house, and then he designed another house in the Torfield area, on St Anne's Road actually, and this is the third house that Stonham got involved with. He also got involved in designing a cottage because Mr. Franklin owned a farm as well. And we move on to South Lynn Drive and Millgap Road and 1930s. Again, most of the houses are, I think with one exception, are designed by Stonham in this cluster. The few of the designs are very similar, but many are quite different. So you can see a theme of a lot of half timbering, but they're not treated in exactly the same way. There's a desire to be different. You look at how steeply pitched that particular gable is, and then these gables are very different in terms of the treatments. In amongst that cluster are even some more modern designs verging on the Art Deco, on modern, and that's one example of them. Plainer, smooth rendered properties. But I think generally speaking, the half timbered ones seem to be more popular amongst the clients. And that's a conservation area as well, so there's a degree of extra protection to keep the character. Now, moving on to smaller houses, Stonham got involved in two of the Old Town, the Old Town Council Estate, and also Hampden Park East, Kingston Road, Southern Road, Lockbridge Drive. Now, he didn't design all of the Old Town Council Estate, but he designed pockets, short sections, and they stand out because they've got just that bit more detailing. And I think they were built for clients as an investment, and originally they were being used for rent purposes. Now I'm almost certain all of them have been sold, but of course I suppose they could still be rented in some way. But you can see that generally the ones that have got the bay window projections, a lot of the council housing is flat-faced and more challenging construction. I think they've got some problems with the need to invest in them, whereas these are very robust houses, the Stonham design ones. These are from the Old Town area, and I've put a map on to just show you the distribution. You see the red dots? That shows you how they're spread throughout that particular estate. And the ones down here are from Hampden Park East. But you can see, in total, something like 150 properties were designed, about 50 for Old Town and about 100 in Hampden Park. And that shows you the estate soon after it was built. And the star in the middle of the picture there is they're constructing St Elizabeth's Church, but you can see all the fields around. And these were all allotments and plot lands at the other side. So it was quite isolated at the time. This is a very large house, and you May, if you were listening earlier, East Hoathly, the oak shops of East Hoathly, Percy Gordon Oak Shop and his wife, having had the house in East Hoathly designed in 1915, they decided that they wanted to have a large house in Eastbourne. So they had this built, and they approached Mr. Stonham, and this is from 1928. And of course it's many of his signature features with half timbering and some tile hanging, steeply pitched, a lot of detailed timber work, and most particularly of note, there's geometric patterns on the leaded lights, very intricate. The other house shown, which is only a few doors away, on Carlisle Road, is the last house that Stonham lived in. He designed this in 1938, and he was living in it for possibly the last 2 years of his life. This is in Willingdon, in 92 Huggett's Lane. It's Brembury, as originally called, and it was constructed in about 1934. It was designed from another one of Stonham's daughters, so it was another wedding present. I mean, he really went for the wedding presents. So his daughter Joan married somebody called Bob's Champion. It's not Bob Champion, it's Bob's Champion. And luckily, believe it or not, I had these photographs on the right-hand side sent to me within the last few months from Australia. The family had kept photographs of the construction of this building, unbeknown to me, and it was built by somebody called Albert Edward Fielder, 1902 to 1987. He was a newly established Willingdon-based builder, and his daughter approached me after a talk I did not many weeks ago, and she said that her grandfather had told her that Mr. Stonham had been very encouraging of his work, because it's obviously a very risky business to become a self-employed builder. Anyway, so that was nice to hear. This one's a strange case in that Mr. and Mrs. E. Cyril Grant came to Eastbourne for a holiday. They were from Lincolnshire, and they owned ship build. They owned shipping. They didn't build the ships, but they used them for various purposes. But they were very wealthy, and they were very attracted by the designs that were going up in Eastbourne, and therefore they approached Stonham and persuaded him to come to Lincolnshire and design a one-off house. It's a huge property. It's on a 5-acre plot, and it was so well received that an artist's impression of it appeared at the Royal Academy of Art Summer Exhibition of 1933, and it also appeared in the Building publication of 1933. And the icing on the cake for me when I managed to go to see it, because it's in a gated property, so it's very difficult to gain access, the owners still have the leather-bound booklet from Stonham showing the photographs when the house was originally completed. So he was very proud of the work that he did. Saxby's in Cowden, Kent, from the early 1930s. Stonham was engaged by the Norman family, Norman Holland family in Eastbourne, and they were engaged to enlarge an existing house in the Kent countryside. The mansion still exists, but it's now been subdivided, and you can see that's a picture of it but it's very difficult to gain access. The icing on the cake was considered to be having a theatre constructed in a barn. A barn was found and moved from somewhere else in the countryside, and this is what happened to it. Those are the original plans, and this is the original interior. It's now been converted to a house. Again, this was featured in one of the building publications in the 1930s. We're near the end. Mickle Grove. Now, this is his last major estate. Just before World War I, he designed a number of properties for Walter Llewellyn Limited of Eastbourne. A number of the houses have, again, very intricate, herringbone pattern detailing the brickwork, half timbering, a lot of tall chimney stacks, etc. This is one of his last houses in 1938, Glencourt, Furnace Road, which is a large house for Mr. A. J. Hale. But interestingly, it's, again, not Tudor-Beaton in any way at all. It's got more of a early classical feel to it, and you can see, some detailing, a pediment over the entranceway, and the original intention was the fenestration, the windows were going to be designed in that way, and they ended up being designed slightly differently. But in any event, I still think it's a rather attractive composition, and you've got coin detailing by having darker bricks eating into the side of the corner to emphasise them. And finally, Mr. Stonham and his first wife, there is a gravestone to them in Ockledge Cemetery. This is the one, not far from the entrance at Eldon Road. And these are just some photographs of the family. This is Stonham and Nellie together. And this is Stonham's son with his wife. And then the two sisters here. And then Stonham is here and his wife Nellie is there. And just to say that I think that Stonham made a significant impact on the townscape and building heritage of Eastbourne, which enriched the appearance of the borough. Without his skilled and attractive designs, the town would be a much duller place. He made a dramatic impact on Eastbourne, and thankfully many examples of his work still survive. 3 conservation areas give extra protection to some of his properties, and there are a handful which are listed. Thank you very much.